recording. My name is Liv Worrell. I have depression, anxiety, OCD, and an eating disorder. So when I was in 4th grade, I used to have a lot of issues with panicking and separation anxiety from my mom and my dad. And whenever they went out, I'd have like a freak out. I'd completely have a tantrum until they'd stay home with me, and then I'd just like be kind of a mess the rest of the night. And I'd, skip school sometimes. I'd often wake up on like Monday mornings, for example, in like 4th and 5th grade. Literally for every week, I'd just be like, I have a stomach ache, I can't go to school. And my mom would catch on to the fact that I just wanted to get out of school. And sometimes I did have a stomach ache. It was almost never from an actual stomach bug. It was just anxiety getting to me. The first time I knew I had anxiety was in 4th grade. And although I didn't know what it was called, I definitely knew that's how it felt. And I was taken to a therapist, and I just didn't have a great experience, and I didn't want to talk about it, and I felt crazy. And because of that, I kind of hid my feelings away. And in 7th grade, my anxiety kind of crept in again with depression. I think that's the first time I really knew what depression was, besides just kind of hearing about it and seeing it in movies. So that was really hard for me. I was in a really dark place in 7th grade, and I began to resort to self-harm and isolating myself. It was tough, and I wasn't really telling people until it got really bad, and my friends were like, you need to talk to somebody. And that's when I kind of talked to my parents, but I still refused to go to therapy because I just had that really bad experience when I was in 4th grade. So then 8th grade came around, and I've always been tall, so all of my friends were shorter than me, which means that they weighed a lot less than me. Although I knew if you are taller, you weigh more, I wasn't fully understanding that I would always be somebody who weighs more than somebody who's 5 inches shorter than me. And so I became really insecure about my weight and my height, and I just kind of started seeing exercise as a way to lose weight. And so I started looking at calories, and I started limiting myself, but not to a very extreme extent at the time, because I was still 15, 14. For better or for worse, I did not have the willpower for that. So 9th grade came around, and my eating had been a little bit better. It was kind of just like a phase almost, but that was my first brush with my eating disorder. So in 9th grade, I was a freshman at Moses Brown. It was my first year. I like to say that I gained the freshman 15, but in high school, because I was not used to the meal plan we have here where you can just eat whatever you want, whenever you want. So I definitely put on weight. It wasn't like necessarily a noticeable amount of weight, but I noticed it just because I was very conscious of my body. Every freshman girl I saw was, tiny. It just made me insecure, and so I gained that weight. And sophomore year, I was like, I don't want to be like this. And I'd been insecure since freshman year. I hadn't done anything about it because I was like, no, that's stupid, or like it won't work for me. I'm not strong enough to be able to do that. So sophomore year, I actually ended up getting into a relationship in March of sophomore year, 2017. It was really a bad relationship. I had been feeling really insecure about myself since spring break. I kind of saw myself in a bathing suit, and I was like, I don't like that. And so my anxiety was, trickling into that, of course, and my OCD definitely led to my eating disorder. I kind of found my control in calories. Another thing I've had a hard time with that kind of goes hand in hand with anorexia and bulimia is body dysmorphia. I think that's kind of something that's assumed when people have an eating disorder, but that's not always a story. Body dysmorphia it's kind of how it sounds. You just don't see your body the way that it is, and it can be honestly a giant mind fuck. Like, I don't know how to explain it. There have been times, and it all depends on my mental state for me personally and where I'm at in my eating disorder, but my eating disorder also feeds off of that. So it's like it's this vicious cycle. I literally look in the mirror sometimes and I feel like I'm looking at somebody completely different.
Like, it makes me so upset when I pass by the mirror in the gym and all I see gosh, I just wish I didn't hate myself so much.
And it's terrifying, but it's real, and it affects a lot of people. It feels like there's something constantly on your shoulder just kind of talking to you in your ear. You can't get rid of it. It's like it's just part of you. I mean, it's not a good feeling, but I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with and don't talk about as much as I wish we did. So jumping back into sophomore year, I rediscovered that I could lose weight by restricting myself. I was in a very toxic relationship, which fed into a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression, and I had been on meds at that point. I was diagnosed officially my freshman year with depression and anxiety, and I was put on meds immediately. I had a therapist. didn't love her, didn't hate her, she was okay. I ended up finding a new one who I loved. But I was having a really hard time, and I didn't really know how to voice that because I didn't want to tell anybody about how much I was struggling in my relationship because I didn't want them to dislike the boy that I was dating. And so because of that kind of toxic energy and the anxiety, generally what happens is when I'm in a time where I'm stressed or anxious, I tend to take that out on myself. When I feel like I don't have control of a lot of things, I control my food. Basically, by junior year, I had lost 20 pounds in 2 months. People were noticing because I was struggling with anorexia and some bulimic tendencies. I took that as a compliment. When people would say I looked skinny or sickly or, oh my gosh, you lost weight, in my head I was just like, it's working, this is working, people are noticing, I'm getting skinny, I gotta keep doing this. And I just kind of fed into it. And by the time I had ended things with that relationship, I had been so deep into that it felt like I couldn't escape it. It kind of became this addiction to the feeling of being hungry, having that control. And I eventually started seeing somebody who specialized in eating disorders. My eating disorder had kind of taken over my life at that point. My weight had dropped to the point where if I had lost even another pound, my doctors feared that it would jump below the kind of ideal weight for somebody my height and it would fall into the underweight category. And they were worried about that because my body wasn't like working the way it usually does. I stopped getting periods for a little bit. I was cold constantly. I was dizzy. If I stood up for too long, I'd feel like I was gonna pass out. Eventually what happened was my doctors basically told me that I had to see a therapist once a week, a eating disorder therapist once a week. I had to go to the hospital once a week for weigh-ins and check-ins. I had to go to my pediatrician often, and I had to go to a support group every week. The support group helped a lot. I still keep in contact with the people who were in that support group. Oh, and I had to go to a nutritionist. I was just consumed by like the eating disorder, and even if it was about recovery, all I could think about was my eating disorder. It made it really hard to distance myself from it. I was put on like a little bit of a meal plan, didn't really follow through with it. I wasn't allowed to exercise. Eventually it got to the point the end of last year where I had to have lunch with my mom every day because they didn't believe that I was eating. It was probably a good thing because if I wasn't supervised, I'd eat nothing, and throughout the day I'd probably eat 500 to 900 calories depending on how I was feeling. And if I ate more than that, I'd punish myself either by throwing up or fasting the next day or using laxatives. It was not a fun time. It's an ongoing thing. So I still struggle with that today. I still look at food and the first thing I think of is how many calories is in it. I've memorized a lot of that. It sucks, but it's becoming more of a subconscious thing than something that I'm consciously looking at and calculating and holding myself to. My eating disorder will always be there. It's just about pushing it as far as I can to the back of my mind until it's there, but it's not something that I'm consciously paying attention to and feeding into because that's where it becomes really dangerous. There are plenty of times where I have kind of relapsed during recovery where I've fallen back into old habits. Sometimes I know when I'm going to and I have a hard time stopping myself, and other times it kind of catches me by surprise and then I'm just in really deep. I don't think I'd be able to get nearly as close to how far I've come, which isn't super far, but it's somewhere, without my friends and my family and my boyfriend and my dog. I love my dog. I couldn't have done it without Jess Stewart and Kate Turner and just all of the support that I've been shown. Aside from that, I've had a lot of trouble finding support in our school. I think that's kind of why I wanted to do this project, because it's really important to me and I know how hard it is. If I didn't have those people by my side constantly supporting me, I wouldn't have been able to get to the point where I was the one who wanted to recover, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many people are telling you to recover. You have to want it to do it, and that often comes from support from other people. I just want that support at our school for people who are struggling. I'd say it's blinding. I feel like it blinds you from kind of everything else you have in life and everything else going on. If it's anxiety, you feel like the only thing that's in front of you is whatever's making you anxious. If it's depression, it's whatever's in front of you. That's all you can see and it's all you can focus on, and that's all you want to do is kind of ruminate in those depressive thoughts. With an eating disorder especially, it's completely, like, it completely takes you by surprise in random moments, and it completely blinds you from what your body actually needs to function and how others view you and how you should view yourself. And OCD kind of goes with that too. You can't see anything else until you get something done or you turn the doorknob a certain way. Taking those small steps to asking people how they are when they look upset and letting people know that you're there for them and appreciating people. I just think talking about it, of course, and just every day, every interaction that you have, not shying away from talking about it and sharing your story. And even if it's not in depth, you just gotta be real and be honest. What I'm doing to try to end the stigma, I know I can't end it on my own, and as a school, we probably can't end it worldwide. I know that I'm putting all of my heart into this, and I know that if I even help one person understand mental illness more clearly, or help one person realize that they're not alone, that's all I want. That's the entire purpose of this. I just want one person, whether it's understanding someone else or understanding themselves, I want somebody to feel confident on the topic of mental illness. And I want anybody watching this to know that in your community, no matter how shushed away mental illness is, it's there and you're not alone if you feel that way. There's always going to be someone who has your back, and sometimes it's the people who you least expect. And that's kind of the beauty in it, is there are people around you that you'd never expect to understand, and they do. So this may be small, but I'm hoping that this project helps somebody.
Yes, I have depression.
No. Yes. Anxiety and depression.
I do. Major depressive disorder, anxiety, OCD, and eating disorder.
I don't believe so.
I do.
Yes. Generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and major depressive disorder.
No. Yes, I do. Yes.
Yes.
To some degree, but not to the very serious diagnosed degree.
I do. I have anxiety and dysthymia, which is the kind of depression where it's like long lasting but it comes in spurts.
I do.
Not diagnosed.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Undiagnosed.
In the past, I think I recovered from that.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Kind of depends on the day. There are some days where I just feel heavy. It's kind of like a weight is just tied to my entire mental function.
Loneliness is a big part of it, at least for me. I act a lot. I don't show like my true self. It makes everything more complicated. It strains a lot of my friendships. So a lot of friendships that I have here won't last forever.
I've been diagnosed with depression and ADHD and anxiety. Normally during the summer, around spring like it is now, it's a lot better, but during the winter and the fall, I just feel like shit. It makes me hate myself, it makes me feel like there's no real point, and then I get out of it around this time. It still sort of lingers throughout the year.
Like a constant burden.
I have anxiety and depression, and it makes me feel confused, scared, and alone.
It's really hard. There's a lot of really high highs and a lot of really low lows. I have to approach every day differently.
Really difficult at times. Sometimes I don't always feel like it's there. There are other moments when it's really overwhelming.
Well, I have depression, anxiety, OCD, and some other sensory stuff. I was diagnosed with depression when I was 7, so it's always been like a label they put on me.
It feels lonely, difficult. It's also empowering. It's something that I know is personal to me and makes me unique and makes me stronger at the end of the day.
Well, I've been suffering from it the past 2 years. At the beginning, it was really scary. I'd just be doing something normal, and then all of a sudden, everything feels like it's crashing down on me, and the walls feel like they're closing in. But now, I know when I'm having an episode, so I isolate myself and just let the feelings wash over me until I'm okay enough to rejoin society again.
I don't have a real diagnosis. All I know is that because of past events, there's been a change in the way I think and the way that I go about my life.
Bad.
Yeah, I feel really anxious. It's really hard to say how I feel. Talking to someone really helps.
It feels some days like I don't even think about it. Other days feels like it's another layer of who I am. It feels like sometimes it's something that's an interface between me and other people. So it's a visceral thing that impacts how I interact with people. The analogy's been that I'm sort of on a life raft and I'm paddling just to stay afloat rather than being able to just sort of float along and manage my life. So sometimes it feels like I'm really paddling hard, and sometimes it feels like I'm not even thinking about it.
It feels like very helpless. Most of the time I feel like I'm alone in this because it's something that you don't openly talk about with other people. It's pretty hard to even tell your friends that, hey, I'm suffering from an eating disorder, because I don't really show anything. This like positive, happy person. Nobody will really think, oh, Sky has an eating disorder. So it's really hard to tell them without being like considered melodramatic, I guess. A lot of people wouldn't believe me that I have an eating disorder, and they were just like, you're probably just making a huge deal out of it. I wish people are more educated, be more considerate.
So I have anxiety, and it kind of came on mid-30s when more kind of stressors are entering your life, and it doesn't feel good. It feels, at times you can feel out of control. It's just, I get queasy with anxiety.
A lot of people don't really understand it, so I kind of treat it like, why would you make fun of depression? Would you make fun of cancer? Stuff like that. So I kind of just treat it like it's a physical illness, because to me it kind of is. Like, having watched it, having relatives that suffer from mental illness, it's hard to watch people not understand it. But I usually just tell them that I'm there for them, remind them how good of a friend they are to me. I'm there for them if they need it. And I just like to tell them that they're loved and remind them that there are people that really care about them. But sometimes it's really hard because you don't know how you can help. You just have to understand that it's an ongoing thing and that they're working on it and they're doing everything they can, and so you have to meet them halfway.
I feel like it's a very invisible disease. You don't really know what's going on with the person. I've never really talked to anyone about mental health, so I also don't know how to deal with it from the outside.
You know, when you're drawing and you start scribbling, that's just like what their mind is. I know people who suffer from depression can be like the happiest people, but they just don't say anything.
I see a lot of stress and panic when it comes to schoolwork, like just being really overwhelmed, irritability, tiredness, isolation.
It looks like a lot of different things. It looks different for each person. Some people you can barely even tell.
My brother, we'll call him Michael, has ADD, addiction, and depression, and he has struggled a lot with substance abuse over the last year. We've had many hospital visits and many instances where I've been there for kind of some of his episodes, I guess. That's caused like a sort of anxiety in me. I haven't been calm, I guess, in a really long time, but it's really tough being the person that kind of like watches it happen.
There's like the real world that's happening, and they live in their own environment that nobody can get into. And then when you try to go and get them back to the actual real world, it's like they can't find the path.
I wasn't diagnosed until last winter my junior year, but I would say I started suffering for the majority of my sophomore year, but I just didn't know enough about it to realize what it was and look for help.
It was just like an event that happened at the end of freshman year, so I had kind of just been bottling up emotions. I thought I was going to leave the school. I just changed my mind. A lot of why I wanted to leave was due to social stuff. I thought that I would get better in high school just because there would be more people, but it really didn't. Someone yelled at me, and that just made me like snap. I just had a panic attack for like 2-3 hours, and I had to go to the emergency room.
I've been seeing a therapist since I was 9 or 10 for like attention issues, but I got diagnosed with depression by my therapist early 2016. I remember a specific day when I sort of realized that I'm not as good as I think I am. It was right after I came to Moses Brown and I'd insulted someone, because that's what people do in New Zealand. I called someone twat, which is just like a thing you say in New Zealand, but here it's not. I got in trouble. My mother got very angry with me, and I remember just thinking, wow, I really fucked up. I just started thinking, you know, is this how I've always been? Is this a problem?
When I was younger, I knew something was a little off because I was always anxious, but I officially knew last summer, which was 2018, like mid-July. I had this awful panic attack outside in my backyard actually, and everything just kind of started like drifting out of place, and I felt like I was kind of zoning out into like a different dimension, and it just really freaked me out, and I went to see a therapist. Then I got diagnosed.
I think the first time I noticed I was struggling was in 6th or 7th grade. It was just a really rough year for me. A lot of things were happening that year, those years, and I could tell that I was more sad and more scared than usual.
6th grade, I struggled with a lot of body image issues, and I didn't really address them. I just thought it was something that was just wrong with me, so I don't think I reached out and talked to anyone about it until like 7th grade.
For as long as I can remember, I've been anxious. It was something that was diagnosed when I was like a younger teenager, but
before that, I can remember being more anxious and concerned about pretty much everything. They told me when I was 7. I didn't really think of anything until I was 12 with the depression stuff. The anxiety, the OCD, and sensory things. Like when I was 4, I couldn't wear certain socks with numbers. Odd numbers are really bad. Ever since I was like 3, and never knew why until like they told me.
So in middle school, I've had a couple of friends like ghost me, like leave me without saying anything. I've also just always been stressed about school. A lot of it is the pressure that I put on myself, but also just the Moses Brown environment of academics. I also had 2 injuries last year, so being on crutches from the beginning of the school year to the end, and I was on crutches the whole summer, so it's just not really motivational to not be able to carry something for yourself.
Sophomore year, winter time, I was just having a lot of difficulty sleeping, difficulty with my mood, being really rude to my parents and sometimes my friends, feeling really disassociated from everyone around me, feeling just so alone even though I knew I had so many people supporting me. I had a conversation with my parents around Thanksgiving time, sophomore year, just saying, I'm not okay. I don't really know what's going on. I feel really lost and like I have nobody to talk to. Can we do something about it? Then, we got doctors involved and I went on antidepressants. That's when it became real and I became, diagnosed with a mental illness, which is depression.
7th grade in the summer, I was in a really dark place and I turned to things that weren't safe or good, and I felt I was very alone, and I had just had an altercation kind of with my friends, so I felt very alone and I didn't really know how to name it because I felt like if I labeled myself as having a mental illness, then I'd become kind of like a burden to my parents because my sister had gone through something similar.
4th grade, when I knew. When my parents knew, I was 3.
Before, I really don't have any experience with mental illness. After that time, I feel something that I never felt before, and I realized maybe something's going on, and I talked to my mother, and she helped me to find someone to talk with.
I didn't even think about mental health at all until I was 19 and my dad killed himself. And so managing that experience and sort of working in therapy through that over the years helped. In the course of the therapy and after that, so when I was in my 20s, it became clear to me that I had some of my own issues with depression. And I don't know that they were there before that. I also think that once I got out of college, life became more complicated. And so I think it became more of an issue, certainly once I was in a relationship and I was getting married and I was having kids. So I think it really became climactically problematic when I started having kids. The stressor of that just sort of, inflamed whatever else was already naturally there. That's when I really started getting treatment for that rather than sort of treatment for how do you feel about the fact that your dad killed himself. And so that was really when I was talking more about me and my own relationships and how I interact with other people and how I needed to sort of rethink how I interface with people in a way that helps me to stand up for myself.
At first I thought bulimia and the rules as something that I can control. Say I can just stop whenever I want to. And then when I realized I was struggling, I think was, half a year ago, I realized that I couldn't stop anymore. It's no longer just something that if I eat too much, I'll just get rid of the food. It later became something that I can't even endure anything in my stomach at all. So whenever I eat anything, I throw them all up. That's when I realized, oh my god, this is not okay. And then I started passing out in the showers. That's when I knew I might need to seek help. And I couldn't stop even if I wanted to.
Super laid back kid. I grew up anything would go. Nothing really bothered me. My parents were actually bothered that nothing bothered me. And then as I got older and I went to college, I started freshman, sophomore year again. I really did not put much thought or effort into my schoolwork. That's when I started to work really hard. And I started to kind of get this feeling, and I didn't know what this rushed feeling was. And then junior and senior year, I started to kind of pay more attention, and then I went to grad school directly following college. Come to find out, I guess I was anxious.
When I was a child, my parents kind of taught me what mental illness was, taught me what physical illness was. Because we had a history of that in our family, they wanted me to know that it was okay. If I was ever not feeling like myself, or if I ever started to have symptoms of either bipolar or depression, they wanted me to know that that was a real thing and that it was okay to feel that way and that I could receive help from it and then get better. People who have mental illness, how it affects the rest of their body, it's not just a mental thing. One thing just affects another, and how it's really a large problem that we have, that people don't understand that and don't take it seriously when someone is hurting that much.
At first, they didn't think anything was wrong. It wasn't until they read my diary, they saw what I was saying about myself. No one should have to go through that. I was playing soccer this fall. I was on varsity, but as the season went on, it was very negative and there was nothing nice to say about me. As a sophomore, you don't really get played that often. I remember playing with JV, and I purposely didn't play the both halves because there's a rule where you can only play 3 halves in one day. The coach would get upset because I played 2 halves JV and I could only play 1 half. I played 1 half JV, and the coach said, oh, Paloma's fine. I would recommend her to play. She's all warmed up. I didn't play until the end of the first half. I was so cold because we were outside. I was stiff. I pretty much just got beat up on the field. I got bulldozed multiple times. Substitution came, and I actually originally wasn't gonna get subbed out, but I guess someone made a mistake, so there were too many people on the field. And so the coach just said, oh, Paloma, come out. As I was running back to the sideline, everyone was just yelling at me negative things, everyone that's on my team. So I remember I got off that field and I passed out due to anxiety, and I stopped soccer. That fall was my last season, and then during the winter I did art. Someone needed a prop manager. I've been a prop manager ever since for all the productions after.
The first time that I had an issue with body image was when I was 7. And when I was sitting in a chair, I sat on my toes so that way my thighs would look smaller. And my mom was like, are you sitting like that? That's super weird. We had a conversation about that, but it's not like a conversation when you're that young. It's really gonna have an effect for the future. But my sister definitely struggled with an eating disorder, and so did my aunt, for sure. But I always looked up to her, and I always felt like she was so perfect, and I always really wanted to look like her. And we just have very different body types. When I couldn't fit into her clothes, that was always just really difficult. Once I realized that I could control how my body looked, I really jumped on that bandwagon. I also just had anxiety about, perfectionism. I think anxiety was a bigger issue for me in high school than depression. And I remember the first time that my parents put me on an anti-anxiety medication. I didn't go to a therapist to have any of that diagnosed. My doctor was a family friend, and so basically we had a conversation. I had panic attacks and breathing issues. My family has had some deaths because of mental illness and also just addiction, and so I was terrified that because I needed to take antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication, that meant that I was like them and I was going to end up like them. And so that was really scary for me. I took them, but I kind of ignored what they were for. I didn't really think about them as anti-anxiety or antidepressant. I thought about them as a breathing medication. I would go on and off of them, which is also not great because when you go off of them, that drop is really, really overwhelming. I always kind of paid attention to what I ate, but then in college I joined the crew team, and then I started coxing, and I am pretty tall to be a cox. I felt like I needed to overcompensate for the fact that I was tall. We would have weigh-ins frequently. The number definitely meant a lot to me and really felt like a defining feature for who I was. I kind of just stopped eating. And I remember I would go to the vending machine and I would get the lemon lime Gatorade or whatever, and I would split it up into multiple bottles, put water in it, and then that's what I would eat for dinner. Eventually I passed out in my dorm room because I hadn't eaten enough. I think I was brought to the hospital or in urgent care, but someone who I didn't know found me. I would say that was a wake-up call for my parents. I was having conversations with them after that, and they were saying, we really think you have an issue. I did not want to see a therapist. I didn't think that was relevant. I thought I was way too strong for that. So I started going to group in an outpatient program. It was helpful in some ways to feel like I wasn't the only person, but it also, other people seemed worse than I was. And so I was like, oh, it's not a big deal. And that obviously was not the case. I had some really hard times with some of the people on the team, some of the things that they would say. They would joke about getting me a tapeworm to help out. They made this horrible joke about a cheese grater and grating off fat on me. It was awful. I also overworked out. I would go in the morning. And I remember my husband told me at some point after we were married, he brought up that he had seen me on campus and that I just looked so pale. and I looked so skinny and I looked so sick. And he didn't know me at the time, but he was like, I noticed that you were like obviously not okay. And at the time, I really hated my body. I hated myself. My sister continued to have issues on her own with her own anxiety and depression and eating. And so anytime I would be with her, it was like playing off of each other, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And again, I felt like if she was good, I was good. And she seemed a little bit worse than me. I remember I had a falling out with some of the people on the team. That was the summer after my junior year that I met Jake, my husband. We had another 2 really, really close friends, the 4 of us, and it was the first time that I felt like I was being valued, not because of how I looked, not because of what I could do for them, but I actually felt just like cared about. They really paid attention to what I was eating in a way that wasn't judgmental. I didn't see a therapist like consistently until I was working here. And I remember when I started dating Jake, he would ask me every night, have you eaten something? Just one thing. 1 cucumber. Like, it does not matter, but literally one thing. That was also the year I decided I wasn't gonna weigh myself anymore. So I haven't seen my weight in 8 years. Just gonna keep going. It made it a lot easier to feel like the number wasn't as big of a deal. I started rowing on the men's crew team. They were so much more welcoming and kind, and they didn't give a crap about what I weighed. Jake was just so supportive. And so all of those things made me feel like I was fine. Then I started working and I started feeling extremely anxious, really, really depressed. I would teach some classes, handle whatever I had to handle, and then I would like go into the prep room and just like have a panic attack. Got myself together. I'm pretty good at putting a face on. And then I started dealing with some things that were external from myself. I decided that I needed to see a therapist for those things, and I adore my therapist. He is wonderful, and he is really, really good at calling me out on my shit, which I really appreciate. And so basically after a couple meetings, when I was like, okay, I feel like I've got this family stuff down, he was like, but you don't have yourself together. And he talked a lot about how my anxiety and depression are clearly getting in the way of how I live my life. The more open I am about my mental health, the more helpful it is for other students who find themselves in that situation. So I try really hard to be as open as I can, but that doesn't mean that I don't have hiccups along the way. I'm planning on going to see another therapist again for eating issues, because that's been an issue recently for me, and it's not something that's gonna go away. It just makes me a stronger, more empathetic, kinder person having dealt with all of this. And it's gonna get better, and then it might get worse. But being aware of it is like the first step. And that's hard for me to hear, and that's hard for me to tell other students, because it feels like a really negative outlook, but it's realistic, it's honest. I mean, I still have my moments, but I'm really proud of the progress that I've made. It's just step by step. Jake always checks in with me. He checks in with me a lot, and having him cook, he does basically all the cooking in the house, and that always makes it easier when somebody cooks for you. Having a person who can check in with you without being judgmental and without assuming that you're trying to do this intentionally, assuming that you are looking for attention, assuming that you were strong enough to not do this before, so why can't you just not do it now? Having a person who doesn't feel that way is so valuable, and it's difficult to find, but once you do, you gotta hold on tight.
With my family, we don't really talk about mental health at all, so even if like someone in my family was dealing with it, I wouldn't know. For my family, it's just sort of like, okay, this person's dealing with something, we're not going to talk about it. I don't have very much experience with it. I've never talked to my mom about it at all, like within myself or like with her. No, we'll talk about things that are happening, but it's never come down to like, okay, what's going on? I talked to a therapist like once. It was a very awkward experience, and I never went back. So I want to know more about it, but I just don't know how to talk about it. In our society, it's become so like normalized, if that makes sense. It's sort of become like a meme, like on social media and stuff like that. Like, oh, I'm feeling depressed today. And it's like, obviously people use humor to like get through pain, but people actually do deal with these things.
I went to a camp August 2017. I was there for 2 weeks, and after a week I stared into traffic, and I very seriously considered walking out into traffic. And I was like, you know what, nah, I won't. And then I just sort of broke down later that day. I don't remember why, and I mentioned that, and I had to go home for the weekend, and everyone sort of freaked out and thought that I really was going to kill myself, when really it was sort of just a glimpse into the abyss. So whenever I mention anything about death, I just like, you know, do you feel like you did back then? And it wasn't. Maybe it was serious. Maybe I'm just deluding myself, because everyone else seems to think it was serious.
Something that I've struggled with is making comparisons to other people. I haven't necessarily been diagnosed with any sort of body dysmorphic disorder specifically. I think that I probably would be if I talked to a doctor. I definitely do a lot of comparing other girls' legs to my own legs. I hate it because I would really like to be able to look at my own legs in the mirror and be like, yeah, those are sick, like they look good. But it is like the worst feeling in the world when you like go to try on your jean shorts from last summer and you're like, they don't fit anymore. I hate this whole thing in general because societally females are pressured to look a certain way, and I hate that I'm coming to that. But I can't necessarily control the thoughts that just kind of pop in my head, and I wish that as a culture we were more accepting of people who just didn't look exactly like the beauty type that we, push girls to emulate.
There was a time when I felt like I couldn't do it anymore, and I felt really like suicidal. I let Tyler know, my boyfriend, that I was feeling that way, and my friend Natalie, and they both ended up driving over to my house to like come talk to me. It was like such like a powerful feeling to know that I had like my boyfriend and my friend together like here, so like holding both my hands like through the entire time, like helping me out, feeding me these like positive affirmations that I could like go on. I actually ended up in Hasbro Children's Hospital as an inpatient for 11 days. That also helped with the feeling of not being alone, just because I was surrounded by all of these other kids who like struggled with similar things as me. Young kids who understood each other to a level where a lot of kids that you'd see at school wouldn't understand. Honestly, it impacted my life. It impacts me today. I want to do more for the people there. The staff was incredible. I can't even put into words how much they meant to me while I was there. I wrote 18 cards on the last day I was there to each and every person who helped me individually with something so little, but I still felt like I owed that to them. Coming out of there, I just felt like a new person who had like pushed through like the bad time and just get to a more manageable, like stable state of being. Since then, I felt so much more like comfortable dealing with the panic attacks and feelings of worthlessness and all of, like the racing thoughts and stuff. Like if you're not in a stable place, I believe that anything helps. Like really, it's okay to not be okay.
So in 6th grade, I suffered a lot with body image issues and being the ideal, like beautiful girl, I guess. There was a couple kids that would just pick on me a lot of the time, and that's when my anxiety really started picking up. I've been a really anxious kid ever since I remember. Like I'd get hiccups because I was so anxious, and I get them like weekly. In 7th grade, the summer was really tough because we split into teams. So like my friend group was basically split in half. I loved my friends on my team, but just not having our whole friend group together kind of made the experience harder. I just fell into this place where I was super alone, and then 7th grade was just feeling loved but then feeling not loved. Like always trying to have someone tell me that I am loved, even though it didn't even help if they were doing that. 8th grade was a better year. Started seeing therapists and like figuring out ways to cope. Freshman year came around and the anxiety levels just went through the roof. Depression got bad, but it was a lot different than other times because this time it wasn't like I feel like neutral all the time. It was like I'm great, like I think I'm getting over this, and then weeks where it was just terrible.
The worst thing about it is that it's not a choice. It's not like I wake up in the morning and I'm like, today we're gonna be anxious for no freaking reason. But it's just something that happens because that's the way my brain is wired. Given the choice, I would obviously opt not to have anxiety because it's so debilitating at times. And when people tell you things along the lines of like, relax and like, you're fine, it's like, if I could, I very much would. My identity as a student and just a person in general is that I really care about everything, but I really care about how I'm perceived, and so I throw myself into everything I do probably 110%, and so I was really trying and really failing. It made me question, well, who am I if I'm not a student, and who am I if I'm not getting A's? It sort of just overwhelms that, and it's not a choice, it's just like what happens in my brain. And so I have to work really hard to actively be like, no, you're fine. Like, you are not an issue if you fail at something.
I've seen a therapist since I was like 5. I used to hate therapy. Last year I got a new therapist. I literally love her. I've been taking meds since I was like 9. I'd say until last year it was mostly like I had depression, but it was like pretty controlled. The sensory, the OCD, I just needed things to be my way. Last year, freshman year, I knew I wasn't like really ready for high school. So I went to high school, a lot of tests, a lot of things, so I got really stressed out. Last year I guess was really like the time of my like worst downfall. I was hospitalized for 2.5 weeks. Then like I got out for like a week. Then I went back for like 2 months, and then I had to go to like partial after that. So I guess with that part was the hardest because, as again, that's why I had to repeat freshman year.
there.
A bunch of my friends have mental illness. I don't really talk to them about it, I guess, just because I try to keep their spirits up more. If they want to talk about it, like, I'm totally there, but usually I just try to keep their mood up.
I am typically a very confident person, not afraid to be myself, never apologizing for who I am, but high school and definitely parts of middle school have made me feel really insecure about myself. Definitely with academics too. Moses Brown is a really hard school, and I've had a lot of challenges here with schoolwork and not always feeling very supported by my teachers. I was trying my hardest, and then there was a point where I just couldn't try anymore, and I felt like I couldn't do anything. When lacrosse season was going on and I'd come home from lacrosse practice exhausted, I'd just be there alone with myself. Negative thoughts would come flooding in. Just felt like there was no way that I belonged here. I just felt so physically and mentally fatigued and drained that I felt like there's nothing I had to offer to this world. And so I knew that it was really bad when I wanted to hurt myself, and I've never known myself to be a person who would ever harm myself in any physical way, but you know, I surprised myself. I cut myself for a period of time. That was purely for attention. I had gotten to a point where I didn't know how to talk about what was going on, and I didn't know that it was okay not to be okay. And so I turned to permanent marks on my body so that hopefully somebody would see and ask, you know, are you okay? And so it was just this weird thing, because when I would do it, I would feel better for some reason. Didn't make sense, and it confused me even more. And then I also hated myself even more because I was so shocked and surprised with my behavior and the fact that I would ever even do that. I had seen my friends go through self-harm and mental illness. It had always felt like I could support them, because even though I never had the same struggles that they did, I just could always empathize and see the good in my friends. It's hard to go home and not tell myself that same advice. I've talked to my therapist about it. I've talked to some friends about it. My parents don't know, but maybe they will be finding out in this video, and I'm sorry that I didn't tell you, but I'm not ashamed of it. And that's honestly my strong message here. I don't ever condone self-harm, but if it is something that you have experienced or gone through, there's no shame to it, because you were in a place where you thought it was okay and it was going to make things better. I am so grateful for the struggles I went through. Those times where I felt alone, crying myself to sleep, hurting myself, that has made me so much stronger, and has also allowed me to use my experiences to help others. One thing that has helped me immensely with my mental health issues is a therapist. I get really scared of being judged and being humiliated. Really deep-rooted emotions that I need to be able to literally release from my body. Once my parents got me a therapist, everything changed. But just being able to talk about everything that was on my mind, or everything that I pushed down, I was able to talk about. I just can't express how important that was for me, and how I think important that is for everybody. Everybody has stuff going on, and whether you have a good friend you can unload it to, or a family member, or anyone, I still think it's really important to know that there are professionals out there who will listen. I think that's one of the biggest things that's really helped me and guided me through this process of, loving myself. And another thing is, support from my friends and family. I don't know where I would be without, these people who have completely changed my life. My family is so supportive, which I'm so grateful for. Same with my friends. At the end of the day, nobody cares about you wasting their time or whatever. If they care about you, they will understand that you're going through something and do everything they can to help you. But they can't do anything if you don't speak out and be honest about it.
Just today I saw 2 people crying because of a hard assessment, or just being really overwhelmed and things like that. So that's where I'm seeing a lot of my friends affected by mental illness.
I have depression and anxiety, and I've had panic attacks over really trivial things. I would say I don't usually tell people, or people would be like, oh, I'd never guess, because illness. I don't like to kind of let people into that side of me, especially with depression. My friends have been like really supportive now about it, where I can just say I don't want to talk to anybody. It just kind of feels like I don't know what's wrong, but everything is wrong at the same time, and my brain's just like self-imploding, like I can't move. Especially over that summer, like I turned to self-harm, and like I didn't know how to tell anyone. I didn't. My sister kind of just found them one day, and it was really difficult.
I wanted to discuss self-harm. I think it's a topic that, beyond just the taboo around mental illness, I think even in that community, it's taboo and it should be talked about more. It's been about a year now since the last time I did it, but what I think people who don't have personal experience fail to understand is that it, in and of itself, is a form of addiction and tends to be a vicious spiral. I still think about doing it almost every day and have the urge to at least once a week. It's really difficult for people who haven't been there to understand the reasoning behind it. You know, I think obviously the bullshit answer people who don't call it neurotypical people. It was like, oh, the person's just looking for attention, and it's almost never that. I won't say never, but almost never that. And there's a multitude of other reasons. Some are way too complex to get into. But I think the important thing to take away, if you're a person who is just trying to understand, is that what tends to happen is cutting in and of itself releases, and the endorphins in your brain, the same ones that would be released from working out, so it gives you that same feeling. You know, you do it and then you feel bad, you beat yourself up overdoing it, and then that drives you further down into the pits. You end up doing it again until something or someone pulls you out of that cycle. It is by far one of the most toxic coping skills you can try to use.
I have anxiety and depression. I was diagnosed in a freshman year. My parents always knew I had anxiety because when I was really little, whenever I was nervous about something, I would hold my breath until I turned blue, and then I would like almost pass out every single time. And I wouldn't go to other people's houses. They would come to my house. Even at like family things, I would cry every single time if it wasn't at my house with my mom or something, if I was like left alone, even if like my grandma or something. In starting middle school, I just got like really depressed. I would cry like every single night about nothing, and I would sleep like 14 hours a day.
So I've had a lot of friends with mental illnesses. In my experience, most of those friends are part of the LGBTQ plus community, which is like a big thing because it puts them at a higher stake for mental illnesses. So I've seen some people struggle with finding their identity, who they are, and that causing a lot of stress and confusion and anxiety in them, and that can lead to some depression or just increased anxiety overall.
Sometimes it feels like others can understand you. It's really not good because you want someone to be here and understand what you feel. When you really feel bad, and maybe you can't really express yourself, and I think that is the difficult part. Maybe they cannot figure out their emotions by themselves. It's really hard to talk about it, but they want to talk about it.
First of all, my dad having killed himself was obviously a big piece of that, and I think separating his action from me was really hard. So that was my first real grappling with the idea that mental illness is about that person's brain and that person's experience, and it obviously impacts the people around them, but when you're a kid you think it's all about you and you think it's all because of you or something to do with you. And so that was, I think, the first time I really had to grapple with the idea of mental illness and try to understand it a little bit. As I started sort of recognizing my own issues with mental illness, I think it's like it's trying to stay in shape. I've had to actively work to make sure that I don't fall back into old patterns. So for me, mental illness is habits of mine that are instinctive to me that make me less successful in my day, less successful in relationships, either when there's a real major stressor in my life and so I just don't have the capacity to be at my best, or when I haven't been really actively thinking about myself and supporting myself in terms of mental wellness. Then it comes back again, like you get out of shape, like you haven't been exercising for a while, and then you feel like, okay, I can feel the impact of this. So that, I think, is a piece of my experience. Having children has been complicated because there's definitely a hormonal piece that comes with having children, and I definitely had postpartum depression after my second child. I was really depressed at that point, and that's when I started taking medication, and that was really helpful because I think the way I describe that is that the medication would put air in my life raft. And I was really anxious and worried about the idea of medication because I was thinking it would somehow change my way I think about things, and it was a real relief to realize that I still am who I am and I think the same way. Again, I just feel like I have air in the life raft so I can be who I want to be. My daughter, when she was in her senior year, she really struggled with mental wellness, and so it manifested in her as being being angry and cranky with her sibling. And she was doing really well in school, and she was doing really well in terms of being the captain of the soccer team and having friends. And so we didn't see it as being mental wellness. We saw it as being like a cranky, hormonal teenager who was just angry with her siblings and who had issues with her siblings. It spiraled, and she was doing self-harm, and she was having suicidal thoughts, and then she ended up being hospitalized for a couple months. She never tried to commit suicide, but she was planning it. You're watching someone else that you want to care for going through it and struggling with it, and knowing that there's deep down there's very little you can actually do. That so much of it is about them. And it was really helpful to watch her go through it. It sounds weird to say. It was helpful to watch her in her moments where she was really struggling with her depressive feelings and articulating what she was thinking and feeling, and realizing that in those moments there was no accessing her, because it made me realize that was the parallel to my dad. It's like I realize now that it was about him and it wasn't about me.
So about a year ago, we were in my car and he just whipped out a Juul, and I didn't really think anything of it because like all my friends do it. But then we started getting to like worse drugs after that, and then it was vodka and weed at the same time in the basement alone, and that's when like kind of red flags started like kind of going off. My uncle as well also has early onset dementia. He had previous drug use like cocaine, heroin in his teens, and that bit him in the butt later in life. Addiction has run in my family, so I have to be really careful with what I do. I have to think about things that like other people don't really have to think about.
You don't really understand it. For many of the people that I know that have disorders, when you grow up with them, you don't realize it. Move aside and you're able to get away from them for a while, and you come back, that's when you notice it. Nowadays I walk in and I'll see people and they'll say, hey, yeah, I can tell just by the way they're holding themselves, the way they're talking. But others, there's some people that were masked for 3-4 years, and then all of a sudden, oh, bam. Grandmother, I didn't realize she had a problem until after she passed. You don't recognize it because you don't know. The idea and the concept of my first ex, because I knew her from like when I was a kid, she had a rough childhood, but her reality, what was happening around her, she started to get really heavy into religion. What she had to show to the people in the religion and what she really was two different people. Eventually, the divergence took hold. Her reality was so far apart from what she was. She started having medication and going to therapists and all this craziness. I'm like, well, that must be from her past. And then she just deteriorated. But it's destructive. And they all treat it with medication, but I don't think medication is the solution. The mind is fluid. Our sanity or insanity fluctuates day to day. It's heart-wrenching. I watch a lot of people suffer from it. I can't change you at all. You're going to be who you are, but you can go and change you.
It was caused by the people around me and their comments on me. I was born and raised in China, which is a society that's super hard on girls' weight. To us, there's just like a popular saying that you're not a good girl if you weigh over 100 pounds. So if you reach the third digit, you're just fat. And that's like what people around me been telling me this entire time. And I grew up being like a kind of chubby girl. I never was considered skinny or anything. And then people will constantly give me nicknames like pig, fat, like all kind of stuff like that. And even my parents wouldn't stop telling me to lose some weight, eat less. For like a short period of time, my parents wouldn't even allow me on the dinner table because they want me to lose weight faster. So under that pressure, and since I was also like getting older, like entering the time that like everybody started dating someone, and I was the only one who was like this ugly, fat girl in the class and nobody wants to date, that's when I started feeling self-conscious and I really wanted to lose weight. After a couple attempts at dieting and exercising, I ended up gaining all the weight back. That's when I started going extreme on myself. I started starving myself. That just caused me to have like growing appetite at everything, all the junk food and all, because my body is suffering from the lack of nutrition. And then I ended up binge eating. Then I went to bulimia because I felt guilty after binge eating. That's pretty much where my eating disorder all came from. I just say that I do feel like the reason why it's so hard to recover from the eating disorder is that I did lose over 50 pounds. People are treating me a lot better than they used to when I weighed more. I don't want to admit it's true because I believe people call me all different shapes and sizes and people should all love the way they are, but it's just so hard for myself to believe that.
My journey was like really hard for probably 5 years. Really hard, like every morning waking up and just saying, I just want to be normal. And that's exactly it. I was like, I want to be normal, not realizing that I really was normal. I just needed to shed all this worry about my anxiety.
pretty exhausting. I always felt that I had to put up a facade that everything was fine.
Suffocation.
It's like if you had an imaginary friend, they're just telling stuff to you 24/7 and all of it's negative.
I think it's a struggle. I think it's not unique and it's manageable.
I'd say complicated.
Adult emotions and experiences to blend together into sort of a nothingness.
Terrible.
Alone.
Static.
A roller coaster.
All-consuming or overwhelming.
Really not like understanding your own brain in a way.
Personal hardship, being manipulated, it's like a black hole. Like you just go down there and then it's so hard to come out.
I would say scary and like limiting.
Bewildering. It comes differently for every single human that goes through it.
Restrictive.
Silenced.
Life-altering.
Illness.
Rehab. And I like to think that everybody can come back from something that's really bad.
Anxiety.
It's like a hat. Sometimes it's heavy, sometimes it's so light you can barely feel it.
Messed up.
Scary. It's a very scary thing to deal with. It's usually one choice that you make. You tell yourself, I'm only gonna do this once. I'm so good at making myself throw up at this point that it's hard to go back. So it's something that's so addictive. Addictive is also like a really good word to describe it. You can't really get rid of it. You just gotta learn to live with it in a healthy way. Yeah, it's a pretty scary thing to deal with.
I mean, it can be debilitating at times, and especially when you don't know what it is, just scary. So I would say debilitating and scary.
It's something that a lot of people in my family have struggled with, so they definitely were very sympathetic. It was hard for all of us, but I'm glad I did it.
Probably when I was first diagnosed, I didn't even really think about being alone in my depression because I knew other people had had it.
When I first talked to my therapist and she like gave me insight on like other patients that she'd had, just in general, I did research on the internet too and saw that a lot of other people like share their experiences like either on the specific meds that I was on, different disorders I had.
I think the first time I realized that I wasn't alone was in 7th grade when one of my best friends said that she was also suffering from depression and anxiety. Just like me, it just made me feel like I had someone who was battling the same battle.
Me and my friends, all of us, we went through really hard times in 7th grade without even noticing that we were going through them at the same time. We were all talking about like how we were in these places and then we're like, wait, I was too. And it was sort of like putting the pieces together. Although I can't 100% understand some of the things my friends were going through, it made me feel like I was a little bit more validated and that I had a support system.
Most people have some level of anxiety. My mom has a little bit, not to my extent, but to me, I always knew that there were other people that had anxiety and who were feeling the same feelings. It's a common thing to be anxious, but I think that the people who don't understand and don't actively look to understand, those people make it difficult. They make me feel like I'm more alone than the actual thought that there aren't other people like me does. Second time I was in the hospital, I was there for a while. My grandparents came to visit. Gave me like a photo book of a bunch of photos of like me and my family and like my friends. Just having that photo book and like knowing like they always cared. I know that they're always there for me.
It's just one of those things that it feels like nobody else has it, but everyone else is probably feeling something similar to some degree. I think just talking to people, hearing movies from school or talking to other people, like your project, it helps people realize and myself realize that it is a thing that many people feel.
I feel like I've never been alone, which is why it was so weird feeling alone. I've always had close friends that I felt supported me in every way, and I always had my parents and I always had my 3 older brothers. I've always just been such a sensitive person and, you know, giving all of my love and energy into every situation. There were some times where I felt alone that I do vividly remember in elementary school feeling like these girls don't like me, these boys think I'm weird. I wasn't like living life, basically, is what it felt. You're never really alone because even if, you know, you don't have a friend or a family member, there's always people struggling. None of us are ever alone. The mental health community can come together.
Jess is really, really nice, and it was good to know like I wasn't like going crazy, but kind of knew I wasn't alone once like my friends opened up to me about their experiences.
In like high school.
Friends would notice that something's going on with you. Maybe they don't really know what's going on, but they're always there. And I can talk to them and it really helps. I can always find someone to talk with.
I mean, I would say I never felt alone because I always had really good therapists to go through it with. I think there were definitely times when I felt like I was I was the only one that could solve a problem or address it and build coping mechanisms.
I actually went to the school psychiatrist and I don't know, I just felt like I needed to tell someone that this is what I'm going through, and I felt like people around me wouldn't understand because like I don't hear any lectures about eating disorder at school. Never. I didn't even know it was an eating disorder disorder until I looked that up on the internet. I thought going to a professional psychiatrist would be a great way to start because I think she'd understand. So I went to her. The first thing that she told me, you're not alone in this. You're definitely not alone in your classmate. A lot of students are suffering through the same thing. They just don't tell you. And that's like when I first realized, oh, maybe I'm not alone in this whole situation. And once I actually started being more open about my eating disorder and started telling my friends, I started finding out that there are a lot of people around me who are also, maybe they're not like suffering from the same eating disorder, but a lot of people, a lot of teenagers are all different kind of disorders and mental illnesses. It's like I'm definitely not alone in this, and a lot of people are going through the same thing.
Probably not until just a few years ago, so probably in my 40s, when more and more people were talking about, oh, I take this for my anxiety, oh, I have to work out or I'm anxious. Because I think that's actually, that's unfortunately part of the stigma. You think you're alone in all this, you think something's wrong with you. Yeah. But it feels like people talk about it more freely. I'm obviously a little bit more private about it. But yeah, I would say only a few years ago.
It just needs to be talked about more. Virtually, at least here at MB, there's almost no education whatsoever on it, and that's a serious issue because I don't know the numbers, but a very large percent of the population suffers from depression. From a school standpoint, it needs to make its way into the classroom environment so that there can be a more open conversation. I would be willing to talk to people about my experience if I knew that they were willing to have that conversation. There'll be moments where mental illness comes up and somebody will say something that just kind of sets me off, particularly on the topic of self-harm. It's a serious problem. So like people make jokes about that. I just put my walls up.
I think if we just treat it like we would treat any other illness, more people would understand it and they would start to accept it. Sometimes you get hurt, and sometimes that hurt isn't something that you can see, but you still have to treat it like it's real. You don't have to see it to believe it.
A big part of mental illness is isolation. Even if you have that friend that always bails on you, even though they say no, still invite them. They say no because they can't get out of bed. Still invite them, still let them say no, because when they stop getting that invite, everything just gets worse.
I think that the more people who are open about the fact that they struggle, the more people talk about it, the better. But I also think that there needs to be more awareness on like a larger scale. I think teaching about it in schools is really important. I think that having people on the political stage being open, I think celebrities are often very open about their struggles. Those people are in power in their own way. I think that people in power, just literally in politics, CEOs of businesses, like people who have that really, really large power are going to be the people who, if they speak out, and percentage-wise, some of them have depression, some of them have anxiety. And sometimes people with anxiety get further ahead because they just keep pushing. And so having those people talk about their struggle and talk about, yeah, they have an issue, but they're working through it, or they're not working through it and they're not really sure what to do. Like that vulnerability is so important, and it's not easy. It's something that nobody wants to have. Every day I would like to not have anxiety. Every day I would like to not be depressed. Every day I would not like to think about food the way I do. The stigma is difficult to get rid of because the people who have it don't want it. Even if there are positive things that come out of it. At the end of the day, if none of us had to deal with that, that would be amazing.
I think we need to have more conversations about it. Being silent about topics such as mental health allows it to be negative, but the thing is, like, it's not a negative topic. Like, everyone goes through it and people deal with it, and we just need to be more open to it because those who are dealing with it, I feel like they should be comfortable and we should be comfortable to just help one another.
It's sort of progressing naturally, isn't it? Because more and more people go to therapists now, more and more people are getting diagnosed with depression, which on paper sounds like a bad thing, but in the olden days they probably would have just, given you whiskey and said get over it. More advocacy, or just saying, it's alright to be depressed, which I see a lot of. And the new generations, I think, are going to be a lot more accustomed to the idea of depression. Over time, I think society, everyone's just going to sort of get used to it.
Change would come from a whole shift in our society to be more accepting that people come in different shapes and that you don't control that. I'm sure that there are other girls out there who feel the same way about some part of their body, and it sucks. It's a part of life being female. I wish it wasn't. As a society, we could work to change that, but I don't know how much hope I have that that's gonna happen.
Honestly, just sharing out all of our stories, not being so afraid of letting other people know that you're suffering, being honest with yourself and the people closest to you, and getting it out there that everyone has their own struggles. It doesn't even have to be like a specific illness, but if we just all come together and create like an accepting environment for like all these different problems that we all struggle with, that could really help.
This is the journal I kept. I wrote everything from like
daily journal entries, and I would do them during the morning, afternoon, and night. Research on the internet about like different food choices and different essential oils and all this different stuff to see how I could help myself. Even when I wasn't at my best, I knew I could get better. And I actually posted about this on social media. It was kind of an attempt to help end the stigma. I know that one person can only do so much. I feel like by doing that, I could spread to the people closest to me how you can be comfortable sharing your story with others, because it will help. And I ended up getting messaged by people who I had never really met before, and they all said, "You don't understand how much this helped me. Like, I teared up reading this. Thank you for posting this online." So I feel like if you're comfortable sharing about your story, why not do it? Because it can help so many different people. Share your story and get it out there that we all deal with something, and that we all can help each other by letting each other know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is the finish line that you cross, and even though you cross it, you still have those ups and downs, because of course it's a disorder. Like, you can't really control it, but if you have a sense of control over it, it's better than nothing.
I think a way we could end the stigma around mental illness is just for people to learn about it and why certain people have it and what it does to you if you do have a mental illness, and just learn more about it so that you can help people that are struggling with a mental illness.
Don't make it such a big deal. Don't pity people. Try to help them. You need to make sure you're there for them.
Talking about it is the way to go, because people are so afraid of messing up. They're so afraid of the concept in general, and we seem to generalize people based on the type of mental illness that they have, when everyone has a completely different experience. The way that they cope with their mental illness is different by the person. So I think if us as a community can at least try to figure out how to talk about it without generalizing, and how to be open-minded to everyone's experience, because although mental illness is a whole blanket topic, there's so many different types, there's so many ways that you can feel. So I think if we're just open-minded, and if we don't shy away from the conversation, it can make those who are a part of that community feel more accepted.
Just getting people to recognize that it's not a choice. We treat physical illness a certain way and mental illness a completely different way, even though largely they are in the same vein in terms of how much control you have. It's not something that is as easily treatable as some physical injuries are. I think that we're very willing to accept and try to support people who have physical illnesses, so if we could try to bring some of that support to the mental illness community, that would be good.
I feel like people don't understand that it's like you don't know unless like you're like really showing like signs, or like you know what's like going on. Like at school, like I smile all day and then I go home and then it's like, oh great, I'm home. I have a smile and everyone thinks I'm fine. It gets worse and worse because no one really knows. You don't really want to open up to people, and now I guess I'm getting better at like opening up to certain people. More people understanding what it really is, and also people don't understand there's different types of it. Like I didn't know there's different types until like last year when they were explaining it to me. Like I just thought like you're depressed, you cry, you're upset, like you're emo, like you can still be depressed, like you don't have to cry. It's not like I'm choosing to be depressed. Like, so I guess just more people knowing, more adults actually.
It needs to be normalized in some way. Everyone feel anxiety to some degree because everyone's stressed out. It might not be the diagnosis of anxiety, but I feel like as the synonym to stress, not the condition, that's something that everyone feels. If Moses Brown had more opportunities without it being like awkward to talk about it, I think that would help a lot.
I think we need to talk about it more. At Moses Brown, we talk a lot about race, gender, sexual orientation, which I think is very important too. I think mental health should be talked about just as much as that. So many people suffer from things whether they know it or not. And sometimes I kind of get angry on how Moses Brown tries to act like they are doing something about it. It makes me so angry because it ends up feeling like they're doing something that they have to do. Like they have to say like one thing. The fucking signs of suicide thing was such bullshit. It was like literally from the early 2000s. It looked like a shitty homemade video with terrible acting. Yeah, I think Moses Brown really needs to step up their game if they're gonna act like they care. If you're gonna do like video things, show real stories, show how they've impacted the families, especially if you're talking about suicide. Sometimes it's hard to see
see if you're feeling like you don't really want to live, how much it's going to affect everyone around you, which obviously I think it's so wrong to say that suicide is selfish, but it definitely impacts everyone that you knew more than you probably would realize. I don't think I could stand up at being coerced and then say everything I've just said, but maybe in advisories or like smaller group discussions, it could be easier, even like just by your grade. Just creating a safer, maybe smaller environment at first, if they're trying to do like the video route to show real life stories that actually show the impact.
Having honest conversations about it with our parents, with our friends, with our teachers. We should be able to have honest conversations about the stigmas around mental illness, what mental illness means for different people, and the different ways to cope with mental illness, because I think a lot of people don't know what they're doing. Also, ideas of what mental illness is, because I think a lot of people can self-diagnose or even not know. I didn't realize that what I was going through was depression until I felt alone, I guess, until I realized I don't feel like I have anyone. If we make sure everyone knows it's okay not to be okay, then the stigma will end. For those who believe in the stigma, believe that mental illness is fake, which some people do, and that it's all in your head, it's just like, if you think positive, everything will be positive. That's just not always the case. It really isn't. For those people, good for you. You do you. If you can't change your opinions because you are not open to looking at facts or having a discussion about it, then you can have the right to your own opinion, and don't make it harder for those who are struggling with mental illness. To end the stigma, we have to talk about the stigma. Moses Brown has to commit to, looking out for the students and having honest discussions and awareness for our mental illness.
I decided to join and lead the psych club. For a while, we used to have meetings in Jess's office. We didn't get a lot of attendance purely because people didn't want to be seen walking into the school psychologist's office. So through that club and through my work and interest in psychology, I wanted to break the stigma by recognizing that suffering from mental illness is something that's common and that a lot of people face, and it appears in different ways. It's normal and it's okay to feel this way, and it's not your fault.
I just think talking about it, the word oh, I feel so depressed right now is really thrown around. But I think saying depression then becomes really taboo. I think we kind of ignore the weight of those words. If people were more open about how they felt and their experiences, I think we could kind of change this culture of kind of keeping it hidden. Everybody's problems are valid. Just because you think someone's problems are worse than yours doesn't mean that yours are any less valid.
Just make people more aware of it and stop movies romanticizing it, because that's not what someone looks like when they're having those issues. They don't look like super model.
Knowing people who have mental illnesses is a great way to understand it better. It can form in a multitude of ways. Exposure to that and honest and realistic depiction of it in media and movies, that would also help.
Educate people. Mental illness, it's a real thing, and nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors. Be nice to each other and listen to people when they want to talk to you. At the end of the day, being educated on any type of mental illness, big or small, I think is really, really important.
I think they should learn more about mental illness and really try to understand what is mental illness, because I think everyone can have it maybe at some time in their lives.
I think just talk about it, tell people your stories, speak about it as if it's an okay thing to talk about. Sharing your stories out loud. People talk about microaggression, times when you say something to someone and you don't realize the impact. People will say, oh my God, I'm gonna kill myself if I don't get an A on this. And that's a phrase people use all the time. And I find myself saying, actually, when you say that actually has a very different meaning for some people. It's not trying to make people feel guilty, but make people just sort of own their role and how they're impacting the culture around it.
Education primarily. Building a safe environment for someone to talk about this stuff. That's one of the blessings of this place. Issues I hear spoken by kids of your age and younger, maybe laughed at and beat up at the other schools. Allowing, whenever there's a moment, each person, when someone's going to talk to you about their problem, shutting up and listening.
I think definitely stop putting labels on people who have mental disorder. Just because I am a patient that believe me in Liv Worrell, so that doesn't mean that, you don't have to treat me like I'm a patient all the time. I'm really grateful that people around me are trying to help me and try to help me overcome this kind of, scary disorders and whatever. Stop treating them so pitifully to the point that they feel like they are this special group of people. That's also the reason why I didn't want to tell people around me, I don't want them to see me differently just because we have mental disorder. It doesn't mean that we're all psychopaths. It's nothing bad. It's just like any sort of illness people go through. I think that's also like the stigma a lot of parents put around it. Just like it's shameful for them to admit that their children are going through eating disorder. When I first confronted my parents that, hey, I've been making myself sick and this whole thing that I need a therapist, and they tell me to hide it. So they don't want other people to know that I'm going through this because it's just like something so negative. And like schools should probably try to educate the kids more. I mean, we did have like a screening for depression and anxiety and all that kind of stuff, but like why don't they just talk about eating disorder a bit more? Like nobody's talking about eating disorders. I feel like a lot of people don't even think that's an illness. We're so ignorant when it comes to eating disorders, and I think schools should definitely do better on educating their children so that, like I said, a lot of people are going through this. I'm not alone. And if they never get educated from the school about disorders that they're going through, they're gonna be even more scared and confused of their own body. Be more educated. The school should put more attention on educating their kids on all sorts of mental disorders.
I hate saying by normalizing it, but we live in a crazy, crazy world.
To make you feel my love.
One thing people need to realize in their interaction with people, like I just can't flip a switch and be happy because it has to do with the amount of certain chemicals in my brain. It affects every single piece of your life, and every single piece of your life affects it. I think that's something that people fail to acknowledge.
Even though sometimes it feels like you're stuck in a loop, everything can change.
It's become normalized, I think. It looks a certain way, like it's the same like girl like in her room crying or like has a bottle of pills or something, and it's just like I feel like we shouldn't sensationalize those things because they do happen, and like it's a real scenario where the person doesn't know what's going on, like they're just so numb to the pain. We become numb to what mental health looks like. I just think that like we need to be more educated on like what actually goes down instead of like just the same old story. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that story, but like what else are we doing besides just sharing the story? Like how are we helping that person?
A lot of people think they know what someone's going through. Even if you're depressed, you don't understand the exact thing that someone's going through. People are going through things in their own life, and like you can't judge them based on that. You don't know what they've really gone through because you only know what people want you to know. You don't know everything.
Ask questions. Even the "hey, how are you" could impact someone who's struggling with mental illness in so many ways. So just asking that could start by helping them feel better.
For me, it's been really important to have people to talk to. Even though you might feel like isolating yourself might help you, but having people to turn to and having people who listen to me and finding my group of friends, that's what gets me through. Like that's how I'm still here, is because of my friends and my family. I think utilize your relationships with people you trust and people who will be supportive.
The whole topic really worries me at this level, in the high school level.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge problem. I think it's a growing epidemic. So I think I'm really glad you're doing this, and I would love to see more ways or support or be a part of more ways that we can make it be as owned and respected a part of someone's identity as your religion and your race and your gender and all those other things, right? That it's seen as just another aspect of your identity.
I mean, I think what you're doing is really good and like really powerful. So
us as a community can get better about the conversation, because with like this project right now, this is at least something. Like I've never talked about mental health ever at my 5 years at Moses Brown. Even in middle and lower school, it should still be a topic of conversation. It shouldn't just be for high schoolers, and it shouldn't just be seniors that are talking about it. It should be teachers that are implementing the conversation. I feel like it's a very common thing that high school students, middle school students, and like even lower schoolers go through. Our community shies away from talking about conversations that are difficult so that we keep our image. But at the end of the day, that just makes students feel isolated. I don't know how they do this, but if like in certain classes you just have to talk about it, like because everyone needs to feel like they belong if they're here in this community.
I love you all. I want to help end the stigma too, so if there's any other opinions about how to do so, let me know.
If you're going through any sort of mental illness, just remember that you're not alone in this. Having a therapist is nothing shameful, and it is okay to share with your friends who would understand that you're going through something really hard. Just please don't feel ashamed of having a mental disorder. It's okay. It's just a stage of your life, and I hope you all can overcome it.
For anyone watching this, whoever you are, I love you. You're absolutely amazing. I may not even know you, and doesn't matter what anyone else thinks of you ever. Just matters what you think of you, and you better think highly of yourself, because I'm sure a lot of people do. Good luck with everything. If anyone wants to reach out and have a conversation, to follow up on any of my words, reach out. I'm here, and Phil Moses Brown. Yay!
Take the world to its feet. Move, mountains, bring it to its feet. Move, mountains, and I'll rise up. I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up. I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again.
Pretty shitty. Am I allowed to say that?
Am I allowed to swear? Yeah. I really fucked up.
Okay,
You can swear.
Okay, so ask me the question again, because I forgot.
So if you could just
Okay, redo, because I actually hate myself, but I did forget the question.
I totally just forgot the question.
No.
Wait, what was the question again?
I think, I completely forgot what I was talking about. No, I'm actually a psychopath, but I literally just had a brain fart.
I don't know what else to say.
Oh, that's why. Okay, scratch what I said. Okay.
Okay. This question is a lot harder when you're the one being asked it. I don't know. This is so hard. Why do I ask people these questions? They're impossible.
Should I answer this in depth? I have a cough drop in my mouth just because sometimes I'll watch a show and it'll be like about how funerals are a scam. I just don't want you to get bankrupted because you buy me an ivory casket if I died of like a heart attack or something.
I did cough when you asked the last question. I don't know why my voice is shaking so much.
Yes. I'm gonna have to cut that part out. Because people are like, why are you laughing about it? Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You thought there was 3 bananas. Ma.
Ooh.
That was like I just said it and